When you mess about in the mental health space, you could do as much damage as a brain surgeon. When I was literally brought to my knees with some of this behaviour and I would break down, he would laugh at me for crying. Paying a perpetrator for me would be preferable than me being silenced by somebody that was abusive.
2, 1, roll it.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guest today has lived what might be the most useful biography in British business. Homeless at 11, boardrooms by 40, the therapist couch somewhere in between. And it turns out all three matter enormously to understanding who she is. After 3 decades at the sharp end of media and advertising, from Sky, Global, Omnicom, the Lighthouse Company, Kathleen Saxton quietly became something else entirely. Qualified psychotherapist who refused to keep the two worlds apart. She co-founded Psyched Ventures to bring clinical psychology into the places that need it the most and, well, probably resist it the hardest. Her book Sly and Mighty is out now, and there's another one coming, and I'm certain it's going to be worth the wait. She describes herself as someone for whom no door is too dusty or broken to open. Given everything she's walked through to get here, that feels about right. Kathleen, tell me a story.
My story is that I had never written a book before, and I felt the desperate need to write a book about an experience I had a number of years ago that involved a form of domestic abuse. And I decided to write the book. I wrote it in its entirety and then went to find myself an agent and a publisher. And when I shared the material with them, they were so horrified by what I'd written. It was very raw, it was very honest, it was very open, it was very exposing in lots of ways. As someone who's a professional executive and a psychotherapist and a mum, but my determination was it was important this material was shared to try and reach others, help others and express that. There's lots of ways through difficulty. And during our many meetings, I was told that legally it would be very, very difficult.
Really?
And so I thought, sod that, I'm going to go and find the best lawyer that I can that protects whistleblowers. So I found the woman who protected the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower and I asked her advice and she read some of the material and took it back because I was determined that I was going to publish this book. And the risk was defamation, confidentiality, all sorts of things. So I asked the fundamental question, which is, what's the worst that could happen to me? And she said, you'll have to pulp all the books and you'd have to pay the perpetrator £50,000. And my agent looked horrified and started shaking her head as if to say, well, kind of that's put paid to that then. And I replied by saying, it's worth every fucking penny. Because the point to me is paying a perpetrator for me would be preferable than me being silenced by somebody that was abusive. And I think that tells you quite a lot about the story of who I really am.
Gosh, what a place to start. So there's an awful lot of determination, tenacity and drive there. Tell us perhaps a little bit more about where those traits come from. Were they there in early childhood? What was your childhood even like?
So childhood wasn't great initially. My dad went on to get married multiple times, so he left the house a lot. And then when I was 11, my brother was 13. I have a great brother who's about to qualify as a psychotherapist as well. When I was 11, we came home from school on a Thursday in the 80s to discover many men were taking everything out of our house. So our house had been repossessed while we were at school and we were literally homeless.
Gosh.
And so I was told I could go back to my bedroom and I could take 2 items. And I had 2 gerbils called Sugar and Spice. So Sugar and Spice got the lucky ticket that day. But we had to sleep on neighbours' sofas and things while still going to school.
How
so
old
the
were you then,
shame,
Kathleen?
I was 11.
Gosh.
So the shame was unbelievable. And we eventually got given some sort of charity church housing space. So I shared a bedroom with my mum for the next few years. And my mum, in trying to cope with all of this, was incredibly violent. So the school were very concerned about that. And there was an offer whether or not I should go into care. So very difficult in those sort of early teen years for certain. But I'd gone to music lessons since I was 4. I learnt the piano from 4, and then I learnt the flute from 5.5. And my flute teacher, his actual name, James, was Norman Blow, Mr. Blow. He said to my dad, if you bring her back next week, if she can get a note out of the flute mouthpiece, I'll take her on. And I don't know if you know this, but if you try and get a note out of the top of a wine bottle, it's the same embouchure that you need in your lips. So I practiced the hell out of it, turned up the next Saturday, got the perfect note, a James Galway level note out of this mouthpiece, and he took me on, and he was the most amazing teacher, and I stayed with him until I was sort of 12 or 13, and then I got a scholarship to a music school at weekends.
Really?
So I think these things are important for 2 reasons. One was that I was good at something. I'm terrible at art and sport, but I was very musical very early on, and I knew that I was better than average. So there was something about that gave me some confidence. And the second was, at weekends, having to go to music school on Saturdays and Sundays was boring as shit. But it stopped me, I think, from sinking down into what could have happened to me given what was going on at home.
It's such an interesting, it's an amazing story. There's an awful lot of discussion these days on social mobility.
Yeah.
And you've perhaps unwittingly mentioned 2 or 3 pillars. One is sheer tenacity. I love the fact that the very young Kathleen was like, okay, this is a problem making this now, I'll show you.
Yeah.
So that clearly was in you.
Yeah.
But then you're mentioning a story that comes with sort of shame of homelessness. We all know what it's like at that age, having a one pair of trainers on or shoes on, let alone. That feels more like survival. Are both those things true? And do they end up being the huge driving force which you've leveraged ever since?
Yeah, I think they're very critical, but I know now I'm a therapist that, of course, some of those things then can become quite heavy and weighty for you. And I think, I'm known for always trying to be relatively immaculately turned out. But as a therapist, that's a curious thing. What are you hiding? What's going on? But you must mention one pair of trainers. I remember being ridiculed for not having any weekend clothes. And, I had one set of something. And again, the shame of that and knowing that that wasn't quite normal, but desperately trying to be like everybody else. I think we all are as humans. We like to belong.
There's the fact that I've only ever known you 20 years looking utterly resplendent every single time. Is that do you think a reaction to the fact that you didn't have a weekend outfit?
Yeah, I think it's a protection. I think it's a defense. I think it's something about not wanting to be judged for that. So you sort of try and take that off the table in some form. I've also got a massive sweet tooth, like really, really massive sweet tooth, to the point where people are like, you need to go and talk to somebody about that, literally. And again, I remember many years ago, my therapeutic supervisor, we were just laughing about it because I was eating sugar or sweets, I think, through a session. And he said to me, what is it that's bitter about you that needs sweetening?
Wow.
And you're like, wow.
That's a good one.
But again, introspection is really, really important. So yes, difficult childhood. Yes, I've done something with it, and that's all wonderful. But I also have to keep myself in check sometimes, which is, does that coping strategy, does that mechanism that I learnt, when can that tip too far? My tenacity can be incredible, but it can also be overbearing. I have to keep a check on that. As a boss, as a parent, as a friend, I'm known as a truth teller in my friendship groups. Well, sometimes that's not always welcome. And I've had to really learn a little bit about that.
I can imagine. I've known you in various guises. So I've known you as the entrepreneur running an incredible kind of talent business, hand picking some of the best talent in the world. I've known you as a global CMO, a really famous advertising group. You've mentioned a couple of times the fact that you are a practicing psychotherapist and you are now an author. But tell us a little bit more about that journey from that young Kathleen to where you are today.
Yeah, my dad, had so many weaknesses and foibles, but he was a man of big ideals, some of which got him into trouble, clearly. But he used to always say, and I've said this before a few times, he said, don't be a Coca-Cola bottle. And I love Coca-Cola. I'm addicted to it, sweet tooth.
Yeah.
But he said, they all look the same. They all taste the same, look the same. That's I suppose, the benefit of that brand. I think that's helped me, certainly in any sort of performance, live speaking, presenting, pitching. When you've played a musical instrument in front of thousands of people when you're a little kid, you can do anything. But I often notice I like a microphone or a lectern, and I think it's like a music stand for me. There's something similar to that. So that afforded me lots and lots of things for certain, the performance element. But he did, I think, awaken that pilot light in me, which is, are you willing to genuinely stand up and be yourself? Or might you crumble for popularity? Or might you feel pressured to be something else because everybody else is kind of doing that? I've always had this slightly steeliness, which is, let me just think about whether I do want to do that or not. I'm quite a risk taker, and I know that about myself as well. But there's something about this authenticity, which has become this word that everyone, bangs out all the time. When you're really being authentic, it will cost you something and it will afford you something. And you've got to take both sides of that coin. And I think many people in the end aren't willing to be as authentic as they might tell themselves that they are.
When you were dealing with so many people running a talent business, you were probably seeking that authenticity all the time, legitimacy, frankly, being a real person.
All
How
the
would you
time.
how would you get that out of people? And even today, when you're speaking to people, how do you tease that out of people? Is it either there or not? Or
Well, I think it's there, but it's your way in. Everything, I think, is about a way in. So I think as a headhunter, you can test for competence. I mean, that's easy. Why bother paying anybody for that? You can get AI to do that for you. But there's something about the way you ask certain questions. And because we only did C-suite at Lighthouse, which was, again, incredible privilege, and I met wonderful leaders, but they're very polished in all the questions that you would expect to ask them. So I would start to ask them other questions. And we would always start with, where was home? What did mum and dad do? What did you want to be when you were a kid? Because it'll unlock something. But then I would always ask, what did you spend your pocket money on? When did you learn to drive? Did you have a Saturday job? And even the posh ones will say, I was at prep school or I was at boarding school when I couldn't. I'm like, okay, what about the summer holidays? Your relationship with money would tell me something about you. I would ask questions like, when's the last time you were professionally vulnerable? Well, a lot of people don't like the word professionally vulnerable at all. So, what happens when you get it really wrong? How do you come back from that? These are the questions that people hadn't prepared for. And that's the way I could get into them in some form. And the way that I used to always think about it, I still do. There's old 70s, well, you're too young, but the 70s, 80s detective series where they'd be trying to crack a safe and they'd be moving the dial to left to try and get the click right. I'd be in interview and that is basically what I was doing. And I'd have to make sure I got the combo right where I'm like, and now I can open the safe. And I remember countless times being in interviews and people would do a fantastic interview and it all went very well. But I still felt, even at the end, there's one last digit that I haven't got. And if I can get it, it will suddenly open the whole thing for me. And sometimes it was someone's sexuality. Sometimes it was something to do with the relationship. Sometimes it was something in their backstory, or sometimes something they were ashamed of. But if you could carefully allow them the sort of space to uncover it, suddenly everything would open. And I'm like, now I get you. And now I get you, I can represent you.
So it was the needing the clarity to be able to say yes to representation at all. Because I was going to say, with what aim? Because I love that sort of analogous thought of cracking open the safe. But I'm guessing that benefits both the place that they might then be employed by, but also the suitability of what you suggest for them,
Totally.
right?
But we've also got to be careful when we're trying to crack people, because sometimes we say people are defended in certain spaces because it's just too tender, it's too painful, or it's too private. And I've learned now as a therapist, you have to build the conditions for them to hop over to something healthier. You can't just try and crack someone over.
That's interesting. So it's not always good that it comes out if there's I love that thought as well, of hopping onto that sort of safe ground and
space.
safe area.
Yeah.
You're describing, ultimately you led that business, you're an entrepreneur, but you're describing it very much, I think, in my naivety, with psychotherapist like kind of language. Was that always in you at that time? It doesn't feel surprising now, for example,
No.
your own leap there.
I think it wasn't the 100% intention going in. I'd had my own therapy in my back end of my 20s. I'd come out of a difficult relationship and I felt that maybe this was connected to my childhood and I needed to somehow work that out. And I got so lucky. I happened upon a therapist who is still one of the best therapists I've ever met. Now I'm even a professional. So thank God I ended up in safe hands. And so I'd done some of that work, which made me a little bit more open and curious about other people. But in the first year of Lighthouse, I'd interviewed a guy who had told me that his dad had shot his mum. And in that moment, I think I'd handled it very well and tenderly and sweetly and professionally. But when he left my office that day, because as you know, as a headhunter, people aren't looking for a job. So you're sort of enticing them to come and meet with you, even though they've got no intention necessarily of moving jobs. And I felt that he'd told me a story that was very brave of him, but I wanted to be sure that I was being responsible in the way I was handling whatever the answer might be. And so I thought I'd go and do an evening class in counselling. I was a single mum. I'd just started a new company. My kids were young. The notion that I could go and retrain in something was just an anathema, and I didn't have a lot of spare time. The children's father, Ned and Nancy's father, is an incredible man, and we had 50-50 care. But in my second night at Regent's University studying, the tutor said to me, "Kathleen, why are you not doing the proper full-on psychotherapeutic training?" And I said, "It's 5.5 years and I've just set up a new company. And secondly, I'm a Taurian and I was born in the year of the rat. I have no patience for anything like, teach me now, I'm a quick learn, give me the papers, I'll learn it all." And he said, when you mess about in the mental health space, you could do as much damage as a brain surgeon.
Gosh,
And I was like,
it's another good line.
so I thought, okay, let me see if I can try and work this out. So I knew I needed to go in term time, for whole evenings. I had to do 3-day stints, 5-day stints. But the benefit of being an entrepreneur was I could take that time off. I could make it up in the evening. I could work whenever I needed to work. This is long before a COVID came along. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna give myself that investment. I'm gonna do it. I had to read all these books. It was 5.5 years that actually went incredibly fast. But initially, 5.5 years, I just thought this is too long.
And I
But
would
it
be
wasn't.
like that too. And you were put off by what you thought was your own lack of patience when you deal in denominations of time like that.
Yeah.
But was it then a reveal to you that actually the level of your curiosity was such that the depth of that learning was something that you would want to dive into? Did you
Complete
realize?
rabbit hole. So lots of places you can train to be a therapist. The ratio between practical versus theory can be different. And at Regents, you basically were in lectures all morning, but then you were in what we call triads all afternoon. So you were in the clinical chair, you were the client, you were the observer. The thing you learn incredibly quickly is you're absolutely not fit for purpose. You shouldn't be allowed out to talk to anybody because you're crashing through things that you think you're being helpful, but actually you're missing most of the things that are important. So you realize how much you don't know. And then you calm down and then you think, okay, I need to settle into this. I went on to specialise later on in trauma. I do lots of domestic abuse, violence, psychological abuse. I do all sorts of things. And I have, therefore, my thresholds around people that come that have suicidal thoughts and things like that are much higher than average. So thank goodness I did all that training because, you're right on the wire sometimes with people. And if you're not well trained, you are putting people's lives in danger. And we can never be certain. Humans will make decisions that we think we can help them with and maybe we can't. But sometimes now I hear about people doing therapeutic trainings that take 18 months. And I'm like, I have a bit of an issue with that because you never know what's going to come in through the therapeutic door. Even now, I don't. Every week, someone will surprise me with something and they might be right at the end of the rope for themselves and they're just about holding on. And you've got to be as adept as you possibly can be. It's a bit like being a surgeon. You've got to be sure that you know a lot about these techniques and you know what can go wrong and how can you try and pull it back in some way for them. So I'm now a big advocate of long training. I had to do over 1,000 hours of therapy as a trainee. I had to do a psychiatric placement at the Priory. It was a lot of training, but thank God I did it because now I think I'm as safe as I think I can be.
Is it possible to prevent that affecting you? Do you try to put up guardrails at all and ring fence it, or is that naive of me?
So first of all, they spend a lot of time helping in your training for you to begin to find the boundary between not taking it all home. And I certainly found a number of routines. So, when I was first practicing, I would take off all my makeup. When I got home from clinic, I would shower it off. I would literally go and have a shower just to try and move all the material away. I struggle to believe that any therapist doesn't carry forward some of the client's material with them. I worry about one or two of my clients after every clinical day that I have because some don't need worrying about. They're already on track. They're on their way. Others, they're right at the sharp end. And yeah, I'm sitting thinking, do I need to just check in? Classical therapy, we're very boundaried. We don't speak to our clients in between sessions. We discourage them from contacting us. And I believe in those boundaries, etc. But every now and again, there is something about the human spirit where if someone really feels that nobody is there for them and they send me a text in between sessions saying, I'm frightened about whatever's going on, I'm going to reply. I'm going to reply because my view is that, of course, if they did it too much, we would talk about it. But now and again, someone knowing that I'm actually dealing with a human, not just a psychotherapist, is really important. So there's something about boundaries, of course. Every single accredited psychotherapist has to have a weekly supervisor. I've got a brilliant one called Sandra. And again, if something happens late at night after a late night clinical session, I can call her. I can call her at 11 o'clock at night. She'll take the call. I can say, I'm just checking. There's lots of sort of safeguarding that goes on in there. But I think to not take a little bit of it home with you would be a little bit dehumanised.
It sounds like that to me. And I don't mean therefore the next question to sound frivolous, but are there positives or advantages to take into your other parts of this career path from the global advertising businesses and marketing businesses? And it strikes me that having the sensibilities and understanding that you have had and that have been trained in and bring them back into those workplaces is frankly an advantage for the business, let alone yourself. Would that be true?
Totally true. And I think that's how I now balance up my life because I think I'm half of the time I'm in deep clinical work. I've got rooms in New York and London and I see clients every week, all the time. But I'm bringing a lot of it now into boardroom settings, executive settings, because fundamentally at the bottom of whether it's the lighthouse interviews or my clinical work now, it's not a judgment of what are you doing. The question is, why are you doing it? And I think so often, I'll give you an example. I work a lot with private equity or VCs that are buying entrepreneurial businesses like the business that you sold years ago. When you've got owner founders who love and adore their business and have put every bit of their, blood, sweat and tears into it, and they have that euphoric moment of selling it to a private equity firm or VC and everything's fabulous, that is the beginning of a whole world of trouble. Because the VCs and the PEs are obviously seeing it as an investment and what they're going to do with it. The founders are hoping this is the beginning of a next horizon, or indeed they might secretly be thinking, great, where's the back door? So neither are wrong, but actually what's going on for both parties? And can I help both parties see each other's opinions and why they're behaving the way they are? So why we're behaving the way we are rather than what we're doing is much more important. And therapeutically, I don't care if someone's got 17 husbands or wives or whether or not, they want to date their washing machine. That has happened. There is someone that had that.
Wow.
What I want to know is why. What's
Yeah.
going on? Because if we're curious about the why we do things that we do and why others might be, the why will give us much better, richer answers than the what is it they're doing.
How are you seeing business right now and the workplace right now? It felt, perhaps clumsily, that in a post-COVID era, the notion of well-being was better understood, whether it be something as simple as work-from-home policies or the grading of the 9 to 5, for example. What's our general understanding in the workplace right now of mental health, therapy, the importance of psychotherapy? Is it readily understood?
No. And it is also masqueraded, which is
Really?
part of my campaigning. I love a lot of HR directors. There are some supreme ones out there, but a lot of us call them human remains because what happens is after COVID, of course, we genuinely wanted to do right by our people. I saw a lot of leaders that absolutely wholeheartedly wanted to do the right thing by their people. But what we had was budget allowance and schemes and well-being and lots of things put in place. And the minute that the financial market got dicey again, it's all been pulled back in. Now, I understand that. I'm a commercial operator, so I totally understand that. But there's something about values and purpose and what's the underlying belief in this. I've just come from an event this morning where someone's friend had died yesterday, and one of the executives I was talking to went to the chair and said, we've got this board meeting, would you mind if I took half an hour off it so I can join the webinar of the funeral? And he said no. So people want to say the right things. Like when we fill out questionnaires, we fill them out in the way we think we should be perceived. But I've worked with and in a lot of corporates where behind closed doors, they could not give us stuff about any of that and they're not prepared to say it. So you've got an expectation of the employees versus the truth of the global executive board.
And do you believe
No
that's-
one's naming it.
is that the demographic, frankly, of those people who sit on boards mainly, as opposed to infrastructure of the business? Or
Partly
both?
demographic, partly generational, because in their day, why would we have to pay or worry about these things? Turn up on time, do your job. So there's definitely a part of that. But there's the other side of it, which is us doing what we would call hot and cold running nannies, where we're supplying absolutely everything. And in some ways, we're taking away an individual's agency to actually begin to take care of themselves. How do we find a gap in the middle of that? How do we find a space where people are able to ask for the help that they need and that we can signpost them, guide them, or get them started in some way on some sort of help?
I know AI is nearly always the question right now, but it's so seismic in every aspect of our society. When you're talking about sensibilities of a candidate and something like a talent business, that now you've got AI talking to AI, bots talking to bots. That feels even more important when people are going to ChatGPT or whatever equivalent to self-diagnose. How do you feel about that? Is there a place where that could ever be positive coexisting with it, or are we in very murky waters?
I think it's very divisive at the moment, but I think there will be an answer and a way through it. It boringly comes back to qualification. So all of us know that any of these agents can spew out stuff that isn't, when you really ask it to come up with the citation, it might struggle because it hasn't quite got it right. These large language models have assimilated hundreds of years of books and knowledge that I had to read as a therapist. So that's got to be a positive, that they are holding all that knowledge. And I think that is interesting for someone who is trying to research what might be going on for them. But there's no way that it can fully assimilate the nuance and the madness of the human mind, because we're all a bit mad. So for me, accessibility is important, but getting it right has got to be as important. And so for me, the way I would encourage it is that people might ask it questions about what might I do, what might I ask my therapist, what type of therapy might I need. Most people don't know the difference between Gestalt therapy, psychodynamic therapy, psychoanalytical therapy. Why would you? So there's something about, if these are my presenting feelings, conditions, belief sets, what type of therapist might I need and what qualifications do they need to have? Psychotherapy is still not fully regulated in the way it should be, but to be accredited, I can tell you, because I have to get reaccredited every 5 years, it is a high bar. So if you find a therapist that's genuinely accredited, can give you their accreditation number, you know you're already in safer hands. I worry a bit about the low cost, easy access, get a therapist appointment tomorrow or in 10 minutes time online. How qualified are these people? How long have they been practicing? And are they practiced in the specific area that you need? So I would use AI to help guide you towards the specific type of therapy that it thinks you might need, rather than telling you therapeutically about what you should actually do.
And we were talking earlier, as ever, about the impact of AI. I find that fascinating when you go all the way up to the boardroom. I think in one of my little sort of brand marketing predictions from a year ago, I said, I think there's going to be an AI board member in every company now, because the ability to just sling it over a board pack and get a kind of exec summary is kind of there. But of course, there's risks and negatives around that too. And when we're talking about well-being in the workplace, when we're talking about mental health in the workplace, and the ease with which perhaps that C-suite can simply turn to their friendly GPT for an answer, is that again a risk? Or can those things work in unison? Is there a chance that maybe the boards of the future, which will undoubtedly leverage AI, will they ignore the kind of Wendy from Billions role now because AI exists?
I think it would be dangerous for them to do so, because if you literally take the Wendy from Billions, as we've said, humans are very, very unpredictable. And we don't know exactly how a human's going to jump because we don't know their backstory. So someone could say something to me about the way I dress, and now you know my backstory of being 11 and having no clothes. I'm going to behave very differently in a response to that to someone who had a very gorgeous manufactured childhood, if you like, on a clothing side of things. We don't know the things that trigger human beings, and therefore pure data alone cannot possibly predict what a human will do next. Do I think there'll be an agentic board member? Of course I do. And do I use them for my own board papers to summarize and to give me some great questions to ask as a trustee? Of course I do. But in the end, we have to tune in as a human to actually what's going on, and we have to ask those human questions, because if not, we're going to absolutely miss something. And unfortunately, we won't fully accept that until it happens, and then it'll be too late. There's lots of different ways of looking at how we combine the brilliance of AI with the brilliance of the human mind. And that's not defending or protecting therapy. I have no game in that, but I just know working with human beings all day long, particularly those that are in some form of trauma or under pressure, or the CEOs I work with that have got to make big decisions, the human mind does very interesting things when they're under pressure, and I'm not sure that AI will ever be able to fully account for that or predict that.
Is it on your very busy agenda, and you're across an awful lot of my streams right now with your books and the incredible kind of teachings that you're doing across a variety of subjects which I want to get onto? Are you looking to change the industries that you were a part of for good, for better?
Absolutely. Governance is the most boring word in the world, but we need it for finance and policy and risk. Any board will have somebody that's responsible for those things. We don't have it for behaviour. And yet people are the centre of everything that we do. We don't have it for behaviour. And people will say to me, well, the chief exec is the problem, so I've got nowhere to go. I'm sorry, you've got a chairperson, you've got investors, you've got stakeholders, you've got non-exec directors. Go to them. Every owner founder, you've been one, I've been one. We could have been terrible bosses. I'm sure I wasn't ideal at times, but I had a chairperson they could have gone to, and I had investors, and I also had very major clients. Everybody has got a boss of some kind. So we are all able to form governance in some form. Why we don't have it for behaviour, I have no idea. And I think we can help a lot of businesses to really also make sure we're hiring for and having checks around these people. Just doing a reference for someone that they worked with 5 years ago is pathetic. We can look at the attrition data for what it was like when people worked for them. Why don't we start there?
That's so good. But it feels like that approach, again, you're exposing my own ignorance, because when you describe it like that, I would never have thought of going to a chairperson. In other words, I felt having to obey hierarchical norms, that it was preset and you could not disrupt that specific ladder.
Of course.
And that was me. And I suspect there are far more people in far worse positions than I.
Of course, you're not exactly a shrinking violet, James. But this is connected a little bit weirdly to the very first book I wrote, which was about narcissistic parents. The amount of people I was working with in clinic who felt they couldn't speak up to their parents, even though they were now themselves 40, 50, 60, were terrified to actually address their parents about something that had been done in the past. I think whether it's bosses, principals, parents or partners, people really worry about addressing a problem because there's something at stake. Our salary, our relationship or marriage, our family unit. Of course, all of these things come with multiple layers of knock-on effect, and we get terrified. We believe that we can't do anything about it. We all have agency to make the change, but it takes a lot of courage, and we don't always have to go alone. We can go with colleagues, we can go with siblings, and we can go with our own therapist that might run alongside us and be the wing woman or wing man until we find our voice in these things.
Finding your voice feels so vital. Tell us a little bit more. And I was fortunate enough to read My Parent the Peacock, because your parents weren't narcissistic,
No.
were you? So much of that was so revealing to me, because I think narcissism, is it narc-talk we have now, for example? There's so much narcissism over every part of our social feeds, and yet I'm not sure I ever fully, frankly, understood it until I read that book. Give us just a little glimpse, if you could, of this space. Is it a good thing that it's everywhere on social feeds, or is it, again, damaging that we're mislabeling, misunderstanding? What are the traits even?
Exactly. So it sits in cluster B. It is a personality disorder, and it sits alongside a bunch of other what we call emotional personality disorders. So histrionic, antisocial, borderline personality. And a lot of these personality disorders, I believe as a clinician, come out of some history of trauma. They're not necessarily genetic, and I think there's an understanding. So the difficulty with narcissism, of course, is it's come into pop psychology. We claim that anybody that's slightly upset us has become a narcissist. And in some ways, yes, for me, it's great that it's on the table as a discussion, but it's very misunderstood. And therefore, people that are genuinely suffering with one in their life in some form are not really being believed or understood, or the severity of what it's doing to their psychological makeup is not really given the effort that it needs. And the amount of people that say to me, and I know my understanding of narcissism was born out of not understanding the abuse that I was suffering in a relationship. And so I went searching to try and understand what the hell is happening here and to me. And, I've said a few times, had it been physical bruises, had the abuse been physical, and I thank the Lord it wasn't, this person would have either been in prison, would have been arrested, certainly would have had a restraining order or something of some such. But psychological abuse, emotional abuse, there are no scars. The scars are in here and they're in here. And so we don't know how to support people or really get our head around what's really happening for them. So I welcome it
Could you
because
give some examples of what's
yes,
happening
of course.
to you?
So what was happening to me was I was beginning to be told that it was my fault, my problem. So, for example, in wanting to see this person once a week, we were engaged to be married. I was told I was being too demanding. Now I'm years out of it. Ridiculous.
Gosh.
My father died during COVID, and the individual said they were too busy to come to his funeral. I went on my own. There was no one else. It was COVID. I had to go for an operation at one point during the relationship. He was too busy to take me to the hospital. So things like that would happen, that normal people like you would look at me when I would tell them, a friend I might say, would look at me as if I was slightly mad, because nobody does that. This doesn't happen. Of course, it can't be quite like that. There must be a part of the story you're not telling me. That was happening. And it's like the frog in the pot. What happens is it starts with not turning up for dates. It starts with not turning up for important things. It starts with, I remember us going to a wedding together and me turning up to pick him up. And he said, "Are you wearing that?" And I said, "What do you mean? Am I wearing this?" And he said, "I thought that you would have dressed a bit more like Kate Middleton." I mean, hilarious. But so the chipping away, the just unsettling, the slightly pulling
not
the rug
enough
from
to be,
underneath you, but not enough that's so overt that you would think, do you know what, that's it, I'm walking. We then have sunk cost fallacy. I've been in it 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. I was getting older. Maybe this is my last chance. I mean, all this distorted thinking that comes with it, which again, I have to go and do the work on, and I did. But you asked about traits. So in the DSM-5, which is the book we use to diagnose, 9 traits in total. But the difficulty was when the DSM first accepted narcissism as a diagnosis, 1980 was the first year we accepted it was a thing. It was all about the grandiose narcissist, the pompous, the show-off, take all the oxygen in the room. And I think now in a modern world, we can see these people. They're slightly ridiculous and slightly comical in a way, bombastic. So that was all well and good, but that original diagnosis completely missed the other type, which is the covert narcissist. Sometimes people call them vulnerable narcissist. These are the ones that tell you how much they've given up for you, how difficult their life is at home, that actually being a single parent has been such a struggle for them and they've given up everything for their children. And so we actually give them the same level of attention, but we do it via pity, via victimhood.
So they need to remain in that period of being pitied and
Of
remain the
course.
victim. It's
Yeah, they'll
important
use
to-
illness, they'll use difficulty at work, they'll use relationship stuff, all sorts of things. And so that then brings us into something that sits alongside this a little bit, which is called the dark triad. And I talk a little bit about that. Narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And often you'll find that narcissists have got a little feeling of one of the others alongside them. We have a thing also called the dark tetrad, and the tetrad would also include sadism. And my experience was there was some of that too. So when I was really literally brought to my knees with some of this behaviour and I would break down, he would laugh at me for crying. And even now when I think about it, it's just awful. And so when you live with that for lots and lots of years, you begin to believe you're the problem, because in a silence of anything, we begin to think, maybe it's me. And clearly, in my subsequent therapy, I've had to go and figure out, why did I stay? That was my material to look at. But the chipping away is the problem. There's no one big explosion with a narcissist. It will be lots and lots of little things that undermine you. Triangulation with other people in the family or children, some level of scapegoating of you. You are the problem in all means, even if you weren't even in the room when it happened. Lack of empathy, huge. Any feedback is seen as criticism. They cannot withstand criticism at all. So even trying to say, would you mind not doing that? explosion all
I'm
the
sure
way.
so many of us recognize that, and in a not particularly pleasant way, be it from previous loved ones or relationships or whatever that might be. Was the writing of the book, this perhaps again sounds obvious, was it therapeutic for you to write the book? And B, it feels like it's out there now as a resource, because even that last 5 minutes, I think, is a unbelievable learning for thousands, millions of people. That's a good thing, right? We need to understand it better.
We do need to understand that better. And I think when I was in the thick of trying to escape and recover, I could not find the writing or the people. I went and met with some therapists to see if I could get some help, and they didn't quite get it, and I could feel it. And initially it's quite frightening because you're like, well, I'll be able to find someone that can help me. And when you can't, the desperation goes to a whole nother level. And so I knew at that point I needed to create some resources when I felt better. And I travelled all over to go and really study academically. So I went and got the expertise and then tried to make sense of it for myself. Started with the memoir, which hasn't come out yet. So that's called Endless. I had seen with my own eyes the impact it had made. And my view was I need to write about this to start with. It might be a slightly calmer way in for me because it wasn't my lived experience as a child, but it was my lived experience as the partner of someone who was a parent. And so that's how I thought, is that I'll write academically and therapeutically about that to see if I can help, adult children of narcissists. And I also knew while I was writing that, and I'll definitely do it about bosses, but one thing at a time. So that's why I started.
I love the step-by-step perspective, though. Since the release of the book, I know it was an Amazon #1 bestseller in the category, wasn't it? Which is congratulations, which is amazing, right? That's book #1, right, for you?
Book number one,
Book
but it
number one,
showed
number
it
one.
was needed.
Absolutely.
And I've gone on and I've trained other therapists now in how to recognize it when it comes in the room with a client. And if you have a client that comes in and says, I think, what do you need to do that's different to standard therapy? Because there's certain things in standard therapy that are actually not good if you're dealing with a child of a narcissist. So I'm training other therapists. I'm training people in workshops who have struggled with it to say there is a way out of this and there is a way through this. And you'll find your own way. There's no set prescription. But I've got to give hope to these people because it's real. And the fact that even I recovered, and I was, as I said, an executive, I'm a therapist. The shame was I thought I should have known better. How did I get caught in this? I'm meant to be a wise woman. I'm a human who loved someone. And all these people are humans who love someone. And that's how we get caught in it.
Your training of other therapists feels quite fundamental and very significant in a kind of classic teach a man to fish style way, right?
Absolutely.
Because millions of people have and are reading the book, but only by training those who are themselves
You've
practicing.
got to spread the word to give more
Yeah.
help. Also, something really simple, James. When you're looking for a therapist in the UK, you look under the BACP or the UKCP. You can go online, you can search by postcode, by price, by all sorts of things. You couldn't search for narcissism as a specialism.
Why? Because it
Just hadn't been figured out. You could search for eating disorders, ADHD, all sorts of stuff. So I lobbied them and I said, if we want people to land in the right, safe hands, you need to change this. And they did.
Oh, wow.
So that's a legacy. It's
What
a
a
little
wonderful
thing,
legacy.
but
It's a huge thing.
it made me feel we're getting somewhere with it.
When you've been promoting and publicising the book, and I know you've done like morning shows both sides of the Atlantic, is it received in the same way, for example, in the UK as it is in the US and vice versa? Are there geographical differences to the understanding of this?
It's interesting because I practice as a therapist on both sides of the Atlantic, and these are the distinctions that I see. Lots of Americans are in therapy. It's almost a point of pride. It's like having a personal trainer, and I advocate that. But actually, when it gets to the really sticky personal stuff in a professional conversation in a TV studio or in a podcast studio, I find the Americans a little less willing.
That's
And I don't want to stereotype because
interesting.
everyone's different. In the UK setting, I find that far less people have gone to therapy, but when I'm in the green room of these places, everybody comes to me with the story of a brother-in-law, a sister-in-law, an auntie, an uncle, a mum or a dad. I don't think I've been to any recording of anything yet where somebody in the vicinity of that recording didn't have a personal story about a narcissistic member of their family. Unbelievable. So the Brits will talk about it behind closed doors.
That's a very interesting difference. And as you say, we don't want to generalise. But I certainly, from my own British middle-aged man perspective, would probably always shy away from revealing too much immediately, but when you do, it probably all comes out. So I can probably see some similarities. I don't know if you're going to love this, but it feels like through lots of your work, from the books that you're writing, have already published, that have authored, I've seen you teach, lecture, I've seen you be an inspiration for young people. There feels like there's an altruism, a thread of wanting to frankly help. And I know this perhaps, again, for a British woman, that's not the easiest thing to hear, but there is truth in that, right? Do you think that goes all the way back to childhood? Do you have a burning, restless ambition to make things better? Is it as simple as that?
I feel emotional as I say this to you, so it's clearly tapping into something. I can't bear the thought that someone can't be helped. And I think when I was little, there were times when nobody helped me. So I know that pain firsthand. And so my view is that I feel, as a fellow human in the planet, that if I can try and help, I must, I have to. And if that means slightly overstretching and overreaching and sometimes working 7-day weeks, I'll do it, because I think we're only here once. We're only here once. There's a lovely quote someone said to me, which is, life is like a great big canvas. You must throw as much paint on it as you can. And I love that thought. So it comes from pain. I know what it feels like for someone to not help you. It's a horrible feeling. So I can't leave anybody. If I can somehow do something that would help, I've got to do it. And because I couldn't find some of that help, whether it's in narcissism, whether it's in corporate America, whether it's in homelessness, I'll do as much as I can. Who am I to not? That would be an awful thing for me.
Yeah, I adore that. And I think that sounds such a kind of truism to knowing you now. But I've always seen your career marveling from the sidelines, but I think I've called you like relentlessly restless. But when you put it in those terms, it's like that drive sits perhaps elsewhere to a CV. We're listing businesses that you've built and decided to shut the doors of. We've barely started on the psychotherapy business that you also run, the practicing psychotherapist, a published author, a #1 bestseller. But in a strange way, because of what you've just said, do you feel like you're only just getting going?
I really do at the minute. It's a really weird thing, isn't it?
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. And if someone had asked me 2 or 3 years ago, or said to me, this will happen, when I was living in New York and I was working at Omnicom, if someone had said to me, you will go on to publish books and go on television and train and all of these things, I honestly would have thought you were smoking some sort of hallucinogenic. I really would have thought that. But it also is a lesson to all of us, isn't it? Which is, it's never over. We don't know what's going to happen next. And I think a very, very dear friend of mine said to me a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying to him, I can't believe all this is happening. And he said, Kathleen, I've known you since you were in your 20s. You've been preparing for this your whole life. And I think there's something about being willing to take the opportunity when it comes. It's about saying yes. Even things like the little piece I do for This Morning at the moment. I could have said no. I had no idea how to do live television or phone-ins. You work with people that are massive global CEOs, politicians, leaders, financiers, and I work with people that are spending their last pennies on trying to do a little bit of therapy to save themselves. I go every altitude. I'm exactly the same with everybody. I think you know that about me. I don't change my persona. But we are all capable of incredible things in the right set of circumstances, and indeed the wrong set of circumstances. So for me, it's about, can we get ourselves just into the possible position in the vicinity of this and then give it a crack. That's how I feel about it.
So if you were to speak to the Kathleen who was being ridiculed because she didn't have a weekend outfit, or the Kathleen that was suddenly effectively homeless, what story do you tell that little Kathleen now?
I tell her now that you are full of agency to go and make yourself safe, earn your own money, be discerning about who you have around you, and be able to say yes or no with freedom and fortitude and trust that you will be okay. You can look after yourself. And if others offer to look after you, oh my God, what a treat.
Such gorgeous, lovely words, and should be all the better for it. Not that you could get much better. Give us a glimpse of the next few years, because goodness knows these last few have been busy in ways that, as you said, you wouldn't have even predicted yourself.
I wouldn't have predicted, and even now
So is it possible to work out the what's next in the 2 or 3?
I'm very sure about what I want to do next. I've just got to find the people to give it to me. Therapy is very expensive and it's very difficult to access. And the NHS do a pretty good job on CBT. But if you are a victim of trauma or other things, it doesn't always help you. I really want a live radio show. I love live. I'm much better in person. I'm much better live. I've learned that about myself. It probably comes back to the flute playing again.
Surely
I
you know
really want
people.
to do that. I do know people, but I've been biding my time. I've recorded a pilot.
Really?
Yeah. I came out of the studio that day and I rang my brilliant assistant, Kiri, as I came out of the studio. And I said to her, my whole somatic body is telling me this is exactly what you are meant to do next. So I'm going to go at that with all of my Taurian rattiness. That's definitely on the cards. I think a documentary about the true impact of narcissism needs to be fully understood. There's a lot of draconian stuff out there and lots of dark shadows and stuff. I think to go and live with a family, a little bit like Stacey Dooley Sleeps Over, to really help people understand how it impacts and also understand the narcissist a little bit. But in the end, if I could allow as many people as possible to access therapy when they need it, whether they've got money or not, that would be, oh my God, a legacy that would make me lie down one day and be happy to pop off this mortal coil.
It would just be so beautifully apt. Part of this whole show, Storyco, is actually, if not a reaction to the era, a natural evolution in its kind of post-social, post-feed, in a world of AI bots where machines can do everything, the importance of a one-to-one, the human relationship, stuff that frankly you've practiced in, I think, every one of your businesses, the importance of this human connection. And yet at the same time, you are across so many feeds with brilliant, insightful, exciting, because they're solving problems and helping so many people in short form. Tell us a little bit about how you see that. Is it just means to an end?
No, I think it's about people getting some level of access. It might also, though, be a way in to someone hearing that and thinking, that's what's happening to me, or that's what someone else is trying to describe to me, but then going deeper and thinking I'm going to do my research and I'm going to really educate myself. I think the difficulty with short form and indeed the agentic world in the minute is how do we make sure that this is true? There's a lot of people masquerading as helpful counsellors or narcissistic recovery coaches or trauma therapists. Are they actually qualified? Have they done the hard yards? Go and do your research, get yourself really educated. I'm not a fan of casual armchair pathologizing. It's incredibly irresponsible, actually. But it's about educating ourselves to start to begin to understand behaviors or feelings or things that are happening and wondering to ourselves, I think I need to go and read a bit more about it. I think there's something going on here. And then when we read about it, starting to get a little bit more steady in our toes around, I think I might be in the company of someone who is or isn't, and therefore my choice around what I can do with that. So I think education, we say in therapy, if something's unconscious, we're operating more than half the time from our unconscious, and we're doing things that we're not even realizing while we're doing them. Once we bring them up to consciousness, we then have a choice about what we do. I think it's the same here. So short form to me, really interesting for gaining people's attention, but then you've got to go and do the long form, whether it's reading a book, watching a film, studying in more detail. And I think that's why longer form pods, phone-in shows, whatever it may be, they're offering a bit more richness. And that's when we begin to understand a lot better. So I don't think long form is over. I think the short form should be the way in. It worries me when short form is the only game in town.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think for years in industries where we met, I think there was a slightly slovenly attitude that everyone's attention span's gone to almost nil. So we'll just create tiny little pieces of advertising and that services them beautifully. I'm so relieved and pleased that long form, certainly in the form of podcasts, has hit the heights that it has. Also love the idea of your live radio show, but perhaps with live audience. I love the idea that maybe there's en masse the reaction to being able to teach en masse whilst you're also performing.
I think the same therapeutically. The sort of therapeutic stuff I do on This Morning is a little bit of that, but we can't give the caller that much time. I think the beauty of radio is that you can give a caller maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Nice.
It's just a little bit more space to breathe, to ask some more questions, to dig in and not try and oversimplify it too much, because you've got to also do it safely. And that's the thing about en masse therapy. I'm determined to find a way to do it, because we've got to give people access to it when they haven't got any money, but we've also got to do it safely.
You've been such an inspiration. You've been an inspiration for me today, but you've been an inspiration to so many people over the years in the various facets and dimensions of the career that you've had, from survival within childhood to your own reaction to relationships to trauma. Is there anything you'd change?
Years ago, you might remember, I set up a business with Matt Shetner called Advertising Week Europe. And in the first year, we had Venus Dennis, and we had a session with him at Ronnie Scott's, and Bruce Daisley, my dear friend, did the interview. And Felix said, when Bruce asked him, did you regret, I think, spending £1 million on hookers and coke? I think that was the question, the actual question. And he said, no. But what I do regret is I forgot to get married. And I remember thinking, wow, what an answer.
I forgot.
I've never been married. I've been engaged a couple of times, and I would love to get that right. I think I've managed to right side so much of my life, and it's the one bit. I mean, my kids, for example, I've won the lottery of life. Ned and Nancy are unbelievable, and thank God, and their dad Adrian's incredible. But I haven't yet got right the relationship. And I think, given what I went through a number of years ago, I just stopped even trying. I think I'm beginning to get ready, and I would love to get that right.
I worry that you've now said this on a podcast like this and you're now going to be inundated with comments.
Wouldn't that be great?
You might have to check the YouTube comments under Spotify. Kathleen Saxton, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram at StoryCoPod, subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production. The producer is Jago Lee. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios in King's Cross. Special thanks to Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton, and Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Please go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.